The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the dry, dusty town of Cedar Ridge in shades of gold and blood. The once bustling streets, full of gunfights and lawless laughter, now lay mostly empty, save for a few stubborn shopkeepers sweeping dust from their boards. Charlotte stood at the edge of town, her long coat flapping in the breeze, eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting trouble to rise from the plain itself. John approached from the corral, his spurred boots crunching softly on the dry dirt. The man who had once been feared as a sharpshooter in these parts now carried only a rifle, slung lazily over his shoulder. The frontier had changed. Guns were no longer the solution, and yet old habits died hard. "Morning, Charlotte," John said, tipping his hat. His voice carried that deep, calm assurance that had once brought enemies to their knees. "Morning, John," she replied, her tone measured, cautious. She didn't miss the way his eyes flicked to the abandoned saloon across the street, as though memories were etched in every plank of wood. They had met years ago, in the middle of a gunfight that neither had wanted, a confrontation that ended with mutual respect rather than blood. Since then, the world had shifted. The railroads had come, bringing civilization and lawmen with papers instead of pistols. Guns were relics now, trophies of a fading era. But hearts still required courage, still demanded confrontation. Charlotte's gaze softened as she watched a group of children chase a stray dog near the windmill. Their laughter reminded her of simpler times, yet a pang of uncertainty pulled at her chest. Cedar Ridge might have survived the end of the frontier, but people like her, and John, people who had lived on the edge, were struggling to find their place. "You thinking of leaving?" John asked suddenly, breaking her reverie. Charlotte shook her head. "Where would I go? There's nothing left for us out there. And maybe there's nothing left for us here, either." John nodded. Slowly, he understood. The world had moved on from there, kindless, barbed, quick-handed men and women who once defined the West. Yet he stayed because of Charlotte. Because in her, he saw something worth more than gold or land. Companionship, trust, and perhaps even love. They walked together down the main street, boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Each storefront was a monument to change. A blacksmith's shop converted into a hardware store. A livery replaced by a general store. The old saloon now closed with a for sale sign in its window. The town breathed a quiet, steady rhythm, but in its stillness was a subtle tension, as though the past lingered, waiting to be remembered. At the edge of town, a small schoolhouse sat bathed in the late afternoon light. Charlotte's eyes lit up at the sight of children running out, waving goodbye to their teacher. It was a reminder that life went on, even as the Wild West faded into memory. John glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You think we could have that someday? Normal life?" Charlotte looked at him, the wind ruffling her hair, and for a moment the weight of the past seemed lighter. "I don't know, but maybe it's worth trying." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows stretched long over Cedar Ridge, wrapping the town in quiet. For the first time in a long time, Charlotte and John didn't reach for their guns. Instead, they reached for each other, tentative and hopeful, ready to face a world that had moved on, but a world where love might still belong. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh hay from the nearby fields. Cedar Ridge had begun to settle into a rhythm of quiet industry, where once the town had lived on the chaos of saloon brawls and gunfights. Now it thrived on simpler pursuits, tending to crops, mending fences, and repairing homes. Charlotte stood at the edge of the town's newly built garden, her hands buried in the soil. She planted seeds in neat rows, feeling the satisfaction of growth under her fingers. It was a far cry from the adrenaline of a draw, but she found it grounding, even soothing. Life, she realized, could still have purpose without the threat of violence. John appeared behind her, carrying a small crate of tools. "You really think these vegetables will survive?" he asked, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "They have to," Charlotte said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Cedar Ridge is counting on it. And so are we." He set down the crate and wiped his hands on his coat. "It's strange," he admitted. "I've spent most of my life with a gun in hand, solving problems with speed and precision. Now I'm learning to wait, to build, to hope." Charlotte glanced at him, noticing the quiet vulnerability in his expression. It wasn't weakness, it was trust. The kind of trust that came when someone decided to stand with you, even when danger wasn't pressing. For a moment, they worked in silence, planting rows of beans and corn, the soil rich and promising beneath their fingers. Each seed was a tiny pledge to a future that might actually exist. They were no longer fighting the world, they were creating one. Later that afternoon, the town gathered at the small square for a community meeting. The mayor, a stout man with a graying mustache, spoke of progress, of the need for schools, clean water, and fair trade. Charlotte and John listened, hands clasped together, hearts quietly swelling at the sight of neighbors rallying for a shared future. After the meeting, children clustered around John, fascinated by the rifle slung across his back. "Do you still fight?" One boy asked innocently. John shook his head, smiling. "The only fight I'm in now is with weeds in the garden," he said, motioning toward Charlotte. Laughter rippled through the group, and Charlotte felt a warmth she hadn't felt in years. As the sun dipped toward the west, Charlotte and John walked to the edge of town, the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers and distant pine. "You ever regret it?" Charlotte asked quietly. "Leaving the old ways behind?" John paused, looking out at the rolling hills. "Sometimes," he said, "but I don't regret choosing this. Choosing you, choosing hope over fear." Charlotte's heart fluttered at his words, and she rested her hand against his arm. "Then we'll do it together," she whispered. "We'll make this town, this life, ours." The evening fell gently, painting the sky in shades of rose and violet. Lanterns were lit along the town's streets, casting soft glows on wooden storefronts. For the first time, Cedar Ridge felt alive, not because of danger or gold, but because of care, community, and quiet love. John and Charlotte sat on the steps of the small chapel, watching the stars emerge. "You know," Charlotte said, "I think the West will always carry a bit of wildness. But maybe the best kind is the one we create, not the one we fight against." John chuckled softly. "I'll follow you anywhere, Charlotte, even into the quiet." And as night settled over Cedar Ridge, they held each other close. Two souls learning to navigate a world that no longer needed guns, but still needed courage, patience, and love. The town of Cedar Ridge thrummed, with a new kind of energy, less wild, more deliberate. The streets were cleaner, the buildings sturdier, and the townsfolk busier with work than worry. Yet, even in this calm, the past had a way of creeping back. Charlotte was repairing a fence along the northern field when she saw him, a rider approaching from the dusty trail. Silhouette, sharp against the late afternoon sun, his horse's hooves beat a steady rhythm, each strike echoing like a memory she had long tried to bury. John noticed her gaze and followed it, squinting against the sun. "Looks like trouble," he muttered, his hand unconsciously brushing the old rifle at his side. Charlotte shook her head. "Not trouble. Someone from before the quiet." As the rider came closer, Charlotte recognized the face rough, lined eyes, wary. It was Silas Tanner, a gunslinger who had once haunted Cedar Ridge, feared for his speed and temper. He had been part of the chaos that had defined the town's wild years, and now he rode slowly, almost cautiously, as if testing the waters of a world that had moved on without him. "Charlotte," he called, voice gruff but hesitant. I hear things are different now." Charlotte's jaw tightened. "They are, and you'd do well to remember that, Silas. The town doesn't need what you brought before." Silas dismounted, holding his hat in his hands, eyes flicking nervously to John. "I don't want trouble," he said. I need a place to settle. The trails are empty, and I've got nowhere else to go." John's eyes never left Silas, alert for any sign of deception. But Charlotte stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "You'll stay only if you respect the town then, the people in it. If you come in looking for old fights, you'll find only doors closed in your face." Silas nodded, a hint of relief in his posture. "Understood," he said quietly. "I can work. I just want a chance to start over." For hours, that afternoon, Charlotte and John helped Silas settle in. He repaired fences, hauled firewood, and learned the rhythm of a life without the clang of gunfire. And though Charlotte's heart wavered between caution and hope, she noticed the change in him. Cedar Ridge had a way of softening even the hardest souls. That night, Charlotte and John sat by the fire outside their small cabin, watching the sparks drift into the darkening sky. "It's strange," Charlotte said, poking the coals, "how ghosts of the past keep finding their way back." John wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Maybe it's not about avoiding the past," he said, "but showing that things can be different now. That people, gunslingers, townsfolk, whoever can choose a new path." Charlotte leaned against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. "I hope you're right," she whispered. "Because if we can't show that, then Cedar Ridge might not survive the next shadow that comes." From the edge of the field, the night stretched endlessly. The stars shone like distant promises, silent but unwavering. Cedar Ridge had survived the wild years and the quiet that followed. And now it faced a new test, welcoming those willing to change, even when the echoes of old violence still lingered. Charlotte and John remained by the fire, hands entwined, hearts steady. The frontier had faded, the guns were silent, but life, love, and courage were far from gone. The morning sun spilled gold over Cedar Ridge, warming the streets and casting long shadows across the wooden planks. Life had settled into a rhythm, but it was not without its challenges. Charlotte and John had taken on more than just building their own future. They were becoming anchors for the town itself. The general store was crowded with farmers and tradesmen that morning, each seeking supplies for the week ahead. Charlotte moved among them with quiet efficiency, offering smiles and reassurance. John helped unload crates, his strong arms making light work of the heavier loads. It was a far cry from the chaos of the Old West, but the satisfaction was real. Yet, not everyone was ready for peace. A newcomer named Harper, a smooth-talking drifter, had arrived a week ago, claiming he could help the town prosper, but his charm hid intentions that were far less wholesome. Rumors spread that he sought to buy property cheaply and take advantage of Cedar Ridge's trust. Charlotte caught sight of him negotiating with the mayor, his eyes calculating. She felt a pang of unease. "John," she said quietly, as they stepped outside, "I don't like the way he's looking at the town. It feels wrong." John frowned, his instincts sharpening. "We'll keep an eye on him," he replied. "Cedar Ridge has survived worse. We won't let anyone take that from us." The afternoon brought a small crisis. A wagon carrying supplies from a nearby town had broken down outside Cedar Ridge, blocking the road. The townsfolk gathered, unsure how to move it, and tempers flared. Charlotte and John stepped forward without hesitation. "Everyone, step back," John called, his voice firm but calm. "We can handle this together." With John directing the townsmen and Charlotte coordinating the children and women willing to help, the wagon was slowly moved to the side, the path cleared, and the supplies secured. Harper watched from the side, his expression unreadable. But Charlotte caught the glint of grudging respect or, perhaps, envy in his eyes. That evening, Charlotte and John walked along the riverbank, the sky painted in fiery orange and soft lavender. The sound of water lapping against stones was soothing, a gentle reminder that life continued, flowing and persistent. "We're really doing it, aren't we?" Charlotte said softly, leaning on John's shoulder. "Cedar Ridge, it's becoming more than a town. It's a home." John squeezed her hand. "We are, And it's not just about us. It's about everyone who's willing to work, to care, to build something better. Even those who might have been lost to the old ways. Charlotte smiled, though a flicker of worry lingered. Even Harper. John chuckled softly. Even him. People can change, Charlotte. They just need to see what's possible. As darkness fell, lanterns glowed along the streets, and the town gathered for a simple evening celebration, a harvest dinner, with music, laughter, and stories shared under the stars. For the first time in years, Cedar Ridge felt truly alive, not through fear or survival, but through community and hope. Charlotte and John found themselves at the edge of the gathering, hands clasped, watching the town they had helped shape. "It's not the West we grew up in," Charlotte said quietly. "It's better." John nodded, his gaze warm and steady. "And we're just getting started." The quiet that had once frightened them now felt like a promise. The frontier had faded, guns had silenced, but love, courage, and determination had found their place in Cedar Ridge. And together, Charlotte and John were ready to face whatever came next. The first frost of the season had touched Cedar Ridge, coating the fields with a delicate layer of ice that sparkled under the early morning sun. The town was quieter now, the chaos of the frontier long gone, replaced with routines, hard work, and a sense of peace. Yet even in this calm, life had its tests, and Charlotte and John were about to face one that would define their future. A messenger arrived that morning, dust trailing behind his horse. He bore news that a nearby town had fallen victim to bandits, men desperate and violent despite the fading frontier. Panic could have spread like wildfire, but Charlotte and John were ready. They called a meeting in the town square, gathering Cedar Ridge's residents. "We don't need guns to protect what we've built," John said firmly, his voice carrying over the crowd. "We need courage, unity, and careful thinking. That's what will keep us safe." Charlotte stepped forward, her eyes scanning the townsfolk. "We've survived the West at its wildest," she said. "We've learned that the strength of our hearts matters more than the strength of our arms. Today, we stand together." For hours, they organized patrols, repaired fences, and fortified homes, not with bullets, but with vigilance, strategy, and care. Even Harper, the once skeptical newcomer, pitched in, learning what it meant to be part of a community rather than just a man seeking profit. By the end of the day, Cedar Ridge felt like a fortress not of stone or steel, but of trust, determination, and love. As twilight settled over the town, Charlotte and John stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the lanterns glow along the streets. The chill in the air didn't bother them. They were wrapped in the warmth of accomplishment and each other. "Do you think the West will ever need guns again?" Charlotte asked softly, leaning against John's shoulder. John shook his head with a gentle smile. "No, not here. Not if we keep choosing this love, patience, community, that's stronger than any bullet." Charlotte smiled, a rare, full smile that reached her eyes. "I think we've finally found our place." John turned to her, taking her hands in his. "Not just a place," he said. "A life, together. In the quiet West, we've found what really matters." The sky darkened, revealing stars that twinkled like promises across the horizon. Cedar Ridge slept peacefully, the echoes of old gunfights replaced by soft laughter and the hum of life continuing. The town had survived the end of the frontier and had grown stronger because of it, because people like Charlotte and John chose to build rather than destroy, to love rather than fear. Charlotte leaned in, pressing her forehead to John's. "No matter what comes next, we'll face it together." John kissed her softly, the gesture carrying years of shared history, danger, and trust. In that quiet moment, they didn't need the thrill of the Old West. They had found something infinitely more enduring: each other. And as the night settled fully over Cedar Ridge, one thing was clear. The West might have gone quiet, but hearts could still beat fiercely. love could still flourish, and a community could thrive where guns once ruled. For those following their story, Charlotte and John's journey is a reminder that even when the world changes, courage and love are timeless. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.